Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Mjolnir, the movies. In this belated episode, because it's been about 2 months now since the last episode, we're looking at the Mad Max franchise, including the belated Mad Maxine film, which I think was called Fury Road, 3 years ago. I'm David Humongous, and with me as ever are Neil Knightrider and Immortan James. Hello to you.
Hello.
Hello.
Now, where do I start with this? I think I'll start by looking at the series of films as a whole and as a series in general, because the problem I have with the new one, the reboot, and even before we get into the various agendas with the film, is where do you put it? Because you see, for me, the first trilogy, Mad Max 2, or The Road Warrior as it was in America, and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, they work as a trilogy for me because I see them as each examining the decline, fall, and attempt to rebuild a society, where the first film explores decline, the second explores fall, and the third explores the attempts at rebuilding civilization, although I think that all three films have aspects of those themes in all of them. But ultimately, I think the major problem is that the series finished conclusively, albeit inadequately, with the third film. What do you think to that?
I think its major problem is that it doesn't have Mel Gibson in it. And they've kind of gone along with this whole idea that it's just a part of the Mad Max universe. It's not a sequel. It's another story involving someone called Mad Max in the same sort of universe, but it's effectively the same character, but he looks a bit different. And this ties into the whole gaming thing. People don't really care so much about the actors or any continuity. They just want a new aspect to that universe. But I don't know why they didn't get Mel Gibson involved. It could have been one of the biggest films of all time, and they put Tom Hardy in. What were they thinking?
Well, I've seen an interview with George Miller, and he said that basically he was going to do one with Mel Gibson, but then he came out with those things while he was drunk, mentioning a certain tribe who has a lot of influence in Hollywood, and so he dropped him basically, like a stone. And
Not at all the influence in action.
not at all. What say?
Not at all the influence in action there.
No. um, so yeah, so George Miller basically came out with it, and said pretty much it was dropped because of what he said. But then, he said that he may have taken him back, but he said that he was too old. I personally think that it would have been better because of Mel Gibson's age, not in spite
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how this man who's gone through it is still hanging on. Somebody that's now past his prime, trying to survive in either a world that's still in pieces or a world that's maybe rebuilding, and he's having to acclimatise now to what must you'd hope would be civilization again, rather than the disturbing, man-eating world.
I think it would also add balance to the fight scenes and things like that, because with the fight scenes between Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, they're always looking for a way in which Charlize Theron can possibly win in a plausible way. So, in other words, there is bits where Max is distracted, bit where he gets his chain yanked because he's still in chains and everything. They're always sort of looking at that way out because, of course, um, George Miller is trying to make the fight scenes and action seem plausible. You have, of course, very implausible scenes in various films where this weak woman can kick ass all of a sudden, but George Miller's not falling into that trap. He wants to make it more realistic, but yet by doing so, he equally wants Charlene Theron to have some kind of a chance against Mad Max, who's obviously, as we've seen in the previous films, quite handy. He's an ex-police officer, and he learns survivalist skills over time. So they're trying to, add a sort of a balanced fight where they can't really be one. But if he's old, that would tip the balance a little bit.
Well, the thing is, I think it's one of these things where they weren't really looking for that, even though that's what the fans would really like to see, an old Mel Gibson. Another aspect to Max when he's in his 60s. How did he get that far? What's he done to survive? What they done instead was they turned a trilogy, which is a guy. I mean, Mad Max, the Mad Max movies are for guys. They're not women's films, but they needed that. They needed that aspect just to get more people going into cinemas to go and see it. So they needed a kick-ass woman involved. And Mad Max becomes like a side character, effectively, for the entire movie. He's just a guy that tags along.
Well, what confirms that is that was their intention, was the way Tom Hardy's lines and performance was muted. Literally in a lot of time, because he was gagged for a substantial amount of it. And then later on, he barely says anything. He's this sort of like a caveman grunting. And even the way he acts and behaves is suddenly this regression to like some of the wild men you'd have seen, especially in the second one.
Yeah, it's a bit of false advertising, actually, isn't it? Calling it Mad Max, really. It's basically using the name of the franchise to sell a female action film.
Mm-hmm. And they kind of, do I say this? They almost nod towards that Max is being sexually violated by the ball gag and the mask and the bondage thing and how he's tattooed. And it's almost like he's turned from Mad Max into a man who was Mad Max but is now being sexually abused. And now the woman's the lead character. And Max is this kind of weakened state of a man.
Well, the bizarre kidnapping over at the start was representative of how they've treated the whole franchise with this release, where he's dragged in, stripped, abused, and then turned out as this weak, mute man, a shadow of himself.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, although George Miller has this very weird sort of bondage fetish and everything with men, I've noticed.
Oh, God.
And this, we're going to sort of get onto that because there's no way around it, really. Even if you look at Mad Max 1 and 2. So, but I think that, the problem with Mad Max is you're right, you've got this sort of character called Mad Max, who's not really Mad Max, because the real Mad Max is Mel Gibson, and he's just a sidekick. And the other problem is that who are you targeting as your audience? Because your action films are for a male audience, but you're trying to sell them this idea of a woman. But why would a man going to one of these films self-identify with a woman? You see, the whole point of these action films is that you self-identify with the main heroic lead as a man, and this is why films that are action films and have a female lead don't really work, because women aren't interested in that. You can see that by the audience figures. Women just simply don't go and watch those films. And what's in it for men? Because they can't really put themselves in the lead's shoes.
Yeah, you wouldn't aspire to be Tom Hardy's Max as any age, really.
Yeah, you can't resonate with them. I've never been sexually abused and ball gagged and chained up like a trophy. I don't know what that feels like. How am I supposed to resonate with that? Then again, I've never had my entire family murdered by bikers either. But it's the sort of thing that you think you could do if, like, you were in that position. You could rise to it and become the hero. But there's nothing really heroic about Tom Hardy's Mad Max.
He does have some certain heroic scenes, like, for example, where he goes back to kill off the people in that car that's following them.
Yeah, I suppose, but
when you think he's the behaviour at the end, though, which only underlined the whole performance, his muted performance we mentioned, was at the end he just silently gives up and very obviously hands over the baton to Mad Maxine, and he just walks away. You know, that's him over at the end. So it's not even a triumphant end for him. And although some might argue that fits with the sort of bittersweet endings that went with the other films, it felt very different because it was obviously not just him going off into the sunset or dealing, left in a mess. He was handing everything over to now the female lead. It was just an excuse to get rid of him.
Yeah.
He also walks away, doesn't he? The start of the first one, he drives away. The end of the second one, the people drive away from him. Sorry, they fly away from him. The third one, he kind of stands there and there's a narration about him. But in the fourth one, he just kind of walks away and waves and bye.
And he could just be dead in the desert somewhere because there's nothing else about. And they make ample examples that there's nothing else out there. Because remember, they make a point of driving out for hundreds of miles. There's nothing. So he's walking away to his doom. That's all you can imagine.
That's right. Well, I mean, the internal logic is completely retarded. Because in the beginning, where does he come from then? Where does he come from and where is he going at the end? It's just nonsense.
Yeah, and how
it
the
also
hell
contradicts the previous films, which talked about the better lands they moved to in the second one.
And really importantly as well is the car. How did he get that car back?
Yeah, exactly, because that gets destroyed in the second film, doesn't it?
Good insurance.
It's just like they've taken good aspects of the other three movies, combined them together in one big curry pot, and sold it back to you. But except it's not for you. It's for the girl you're taking to the cinema.
Yeah, except that she's not going to be interested in it because she finds action films crap.
Yeah.
Because she's a woman, and women have different interests. Yeah, it's nonsense. I've noticed that it's always shitlibs that sort of have these female leads. A very good example is the Millennium series of books and then films. The guy that wrote the Millennium, the Millennium books and films that I'm talking about, the girl with the dragon tattoo and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, is that what it was called?
I think they're called the Millennium series of films, aren't they, and books? Isn't that right?
So I thought that was. I was thinking of the TV series where
with Lance Henriksen. No,
that's
him. Yeah, because but no, this is the trilogy with the girl with the dragon tattoo and all that kind of stuff. But the guy who actually wrote that, can't remember his name, Scandinavian guy, Swedish I think. He essentially built up this female lead because he stood by while this woman got raped, and he couldn't he couldn't muster up the courage to help her, and so they're making this artificial character, this strong woman who can take care of them, of herself, whereas and it's sort of a bit of a cop-out. It's basically absolving themselves of responsibility to take care of the women.
I haven't seen them.
It's anti-heroic, in other words, and I think that Miller's like that. Because it's interesting that he's talked about this in an interview, George Miller, that his friends were all sort of petrol heads and all sort of whizzing around and everything. Some of them got killed, but he never got involved in that. So he had sort of an anti-heroic personality, in a way. And I think that there's a lot to that with these liberals, that they're creating fantasies of the lives they would have liked to have led.
I wonder if that's had an impact on his choice to have his wife work on the film, so much. She had such a critical control over it, how it was put together, and he said it had to be that way because if a man did it, it would just be like every other film a man made. This is apparently the reasoning for having Mrs. Miller work on it.
Yeah,
which is a very strange sort of reasoning.
Yeah, but in a way it's stupid because you're making a film for men. It's it's sort of smashing a hammer, against your own face, because you're sort of cutting your nose off to spite your face in a way.
But it's also going against even their own rhetoric, because they're now claiming that a film's going to be a certain way just because of her sex. It's not because of her talent or ability. They've just openly stated that a man makes a man's film and a woman makes a woman's, which goes against their claims.
Yeah, yeah. So they are saying, that they're making a woman's film, but yet, if they were making a woman's film, then the whole genre would be different, surely.
Well, it's becoming different now, especially now. They are trying to change those boundaries, especially Star Wars.
The cinema takings, because the last films I've been to have been like ghost towns in the cinema.
Yeah, cinemas are empty now.
Yeah,
like nobody goes to them, and because they know they're going to get tricked out of handing over £10 for a ticket and about £50 for a popcorn and Coke to get force-fed this rubbish. That's going to be so liberal and PC, even liberals and PC people can't stand them. Well, I mean, it's not like there was queues around the block for the last Ghostbusters movie.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with that is, of course, they're asking men as well to pay money to go in and be insulted, because it's openly insulting them. It's the whole film when they take over and try and do these shit lib films. They'd always do it as a take that, men, instead of just doing something positive that maybe affirms whatever they want to boost, whatever group. They've got to make it this petty jab. Of course, it's a petty jab that costs $200 million, and the people that they're jabbing at aren't willing to pay for it. And when they're not willing to pay for it, they end up losing money.
Yep. Yeah. And I remember when the Ghostbusters advert came out, and they had the theme tune at the start, sort of in the background, and there was like a creepy, dimly lit subway scene. And then it started up, and it was women, and I thought, oh God, I knew they were going to do this, make it all women. But I just knew that there was going to be a really loud, screaming black woman somewhere in that trailer, and holy shit, halfway through there was. And I thought, you're not just giving it to us on a plate and saying, eat it, you're throwing it at us. You don't like loud, fat black women who scream, we're going to give you the biggest one we can find. And it felt insulting.
Yeah, and actually, wouldn't it be insulting to blacks as well to create this loudmouth stereotype?
Yeah, like the Tom and Jerry sort of Tom and Jerry mum.
And in the first film, Ghostbusters film, established the black man as a kind of ordinary, sensible working man. He was actually the sort of viewpoint of the audience, not a scientist and so on. So they were actually much kinder in the original film than the SJW remake.
Yeah. That's right. They weren't trying to build him up as something he wasn't. They were leaving him as what he was, sort of this very ordinary, not particularly bright, but well-meaning black guy.
Yep.
So,
and it's the same with this Mad Max movie, though, isn't it? The new one, they have this arguably beautiful woman who's really tough and badass, but she's only got one arm as well, remember? So she's like the double whammy of girl power.
And bringing in the transableism stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, absolutely, yeah. They're absolutely getting into the disableism and everything, yeah.
And of course, the only way they can get around it is the entirely unthematic, ridiculous robot arm, which is more advanced than anything we have now, somehow made in the post-apocalypse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Some of the technology and so on just doesn't make sense whatsoever, does it? Like Immortan Joe's iron lung or whatever it is, and face mask and everything.
But that shows the lack of respect for the genre, because the original ones, although it had some fantastical elements, it was just on the border of believability. You could see that, oh yeah, somebody might do that, even if it's stupid. It's something you could do. But in this one, it was pure fantasy, really. It was... you may as well watch a steampunk thing.
That's right. The internal logic completely failed. In a way, I think it failed a bit in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, but here we've got it to the extreme. I think that the first two Mad Max films had a very good internal logic, as well because of the limitations of budget. I think it constrained them into creating a good internal logic.
Mm. You could watch the first one and the second one, and you could, even though you knew it was a film of fiction, you could imagine it being like that. You could visualize it because it's not really too far away from what we have now. Just things that are a bit older, a bit more ruined and decrepit. You can't really imagine giant water tanks in the middle of the desert and this guy with iron lungs driving around in this massive V10 engine beast of a car, burning petrol needlessly. I just can't really see it.
The first one as well, because it was closer to reality and it felt like something that could happen. It was, it was one of these ones where it was the disaster is just coming tomorrow. You're not fully into it. It's the halfway there, which made it all feel real. But as a consequence, the violence in this, this action felt more real and more intimidating and scary when you see although it's much more petty in scale, but it's much scarier when you see the gang threatening the couple or the locals in the town. You really feel for them because you think, well, these are feel like real people. It feels like real violence that could happen in your own town. But and Martin's Joe's got his cavalcade diesel punk, bizarre half robot people. It just feels unreal. I could be watching some sort of robot anime story.
Like the flamethrower guitar guy.
Oh God, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, how could I? Yeah, I mean it doesn't even fit within the bounds established in the previous films.
It's like basically the teenager has made the films, and is
with an unlimited budget.
Yeah, that's right. And he's sort, what's the coolest thing I can think of? I know a guy, a heavy metal guitar player, and the guitar shoots flames, and he's on a bungee as well. Whoa, that's like the coolest thing ever. It really is sort of a sort of 14-year-old's mentality.
Yeah,
and he wasn't even a good guitarist either. He was a bit shit.
He was a real one as well, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Is he?
Yeah. He's got an odd name, I remember. He's in some kind of a band. Isn't he some kind of LGBT as well? It's called Iota, isn't he? The guy who plays that guy, and I think he's some kind of LGBT
oh, good
thingy as well. Yeah, he is. Yeah, I've just looked him up. Yeah, I thought he was. Oh, and he's a half caste as well. He's part Maori and part white. So you've got everything there, except that now here's the thing, because he's playing a white guy, isn't he?
He's playing a guy that's painted white. How humiliating would that be? They get a black guy into your audition. You say, by the way, we're going to have to paint you white.
Yeah, but isn't that sort of
whitewashed?
We've got a few things going here. Isn't that cultural appropriation? And isn't that white? Isn't that whiting up?
And remember, of course, all the crew. They've got this sort of bastardized version of kind of Norse stuff. Going to Valhalla nonsense.
Well,
that's their creed.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. Now, bear in mind what kind of audience are they wanting to attract? What kind of audience go to see these kind of films? It's people like us, isn't it? Let's be honest. It's it's white straight males who just want a bit of escapism for a couple of hours or something, and especially as we were when we were young men, kind of thing. 18 years old or whatever. We would go to watch these films. But now they're deconstructing the audience. The audience basically are the bad guys. So so straight white males who like heavy metal and are into the Norse stuff. It's basically taking a jibe at their very audience. So and then they wonder why the audience has stopped going.
Yeah.
They've taken all the traditional masculine traits, parodied them, and turned it up to 11 to make it look ridiculous. And that was the whole theme of the fourth.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, to be honest, it started in the third, I think, in Beyond Thunderdome, to a degree.
Yeah. But, of course, there it started with the female leader, where there's a black American that somehow got into the post-apocalyptic Australia during the apocalypse, and became a leader of a town. I don't know how that works. And of course, but then you get to the fourth one, where you've got whole bands of these strong, independent women who don't need no man.
Well, if you notice a lot of these movies, what they're not actually admitting to is all these movies that are coming out now about strong women. It's not about everyday average single mums or anything like that. It's always like they're either ninjas or special agents or they're robots or they've got something added to them to make them super powerful. They're not strong women. How does that represent your everyday average strong woman?
Yeah, they're turning them into bad parodies of men. I mean, that's what they're doing. So it's not even respecting the women, and genuinely, they're just turning them into really bad parodies of the men.
Then you got like Sarah Connor or something like that from Terminator. Now, I personally like the Terminator movies, well, the first two, but there was nothing about Sarah Connor that was like above normal. She was just like a girl who worked in a cafe or something like that, who worked night shifts. What is so different about that and to these modern ones is that these modern heroic women have all got something added to them by science or some kind of futuristic advancement, or they're ninjas or they're special agents. It's not your everyday average woman, but women seem to love it.
And of course, with Sarah Connor, her strength was her will, her determination to survive. It was completely believable. You could imagine somebody that was determined could fight off somebody with a gun if they held off their nerve.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that archetype started with Ripley from Alien.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, absolutely. She came well before Sarah Connor.
Yeah, I think that was sort of the first heroic female lead in a mainstream film, at least anyway. But she was believable, and as well, the men didn't get deconstructed because I mean, if you watch, we ought to do a film on the Alien series, but I'll just sort of briefly talk about the second Alien film, which I think is very interesting, in that there's a sort of family forms with the leader of the Marines that go down. I can't remember his name, and Ripley and the child Newt, but they sort of act as a unit and as a family unit, and Ripley very much supports the leader of the of the Marines who goes down, and there's no sort of question that she's some kind of badass putting him in his place or something like that.
Yeah, there's no infighting or constant competition, which they always have to show in the new ones. This petty back and forth or jabs.
Like in the new Star Wars movie, where every decision a man makes is demeaned by the woman and like frowned upon. There was nothing like that.
That's right. It's interesting that I mean, there's some really serious anti-male stuff gets in, especially when they meet those old biker girls, the old biker ladies and everything, and the lead old crone. She says, "One man, one bullet," and that's very interesting because there's two sources of reference for that.
Winnie Mandela, was she one of them?
Pretty much, yeah. There's one is the one man, one vote, which is the universal suffrage for men kind of slogan, which women at the time didn't get, of course. And then there's the one settler, one bullet, which was used by the African People's Liberation Army, which was the paramilitary wing of the Pan-African Congress. These were the, sort of anti-whites that ultimately, I don't know if you remember the Amy Beale case, this activist who was a pro-black activist who went to America, who came from America, and went to South Africa to become an anti-apartheid activist, and she was killed by them in 1993. And the people who killed her, the blacks who killed her, were calling her a white bitch and everything. So she went to support those people, and they killed her. So there's a certain irony there that they would actually use this quotation because ultimately they killed that white woman. Interestingly, as well on that, you know, the killers who they stoned her and stabbed her to death. You know, and during their trial they laughed, and yet in 1998 those killers were pardoned as part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And her father, Peter Beale, he actually went and shook hands with her killers, and publicly forgave them.
Oh my.
I mean, how shitlib is that?
Yeah.
It's pathetic.
It is. How would you do that if your daughter had been killed?
Especially so
I don't
brutally.
get their mentality. I really don't. But anyway, that's about the sort of quotation where that quotation comes from. And
of course, this was filmed in Africa as well, which is a coincidence.
yeah, well, I don't necessarily believe in coincidences.
Is Charlize Theron not one of these suspect characters as well, who is on the side of she's on the anti-white side of South Africa? Because that's where she's from, isn't she? Is she not from there?
She is very much, but she's very sort of pro-black. I'm pretty sure she's adopted one as well, hasn't she?
Yeah. She's not adopted any white children from South Africa whose parents have been murdered.
That's right.
Of course, she's plenty of money for a gated community.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Must be nice.
Yeah, she's very much a paid prostitute. Now, and another thing about the villains as well is that they all sort of have very pale skin and blue eyes, and they're sort of semi-vampires who drink blood and so on. Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and there's a little slavery narrative in there as well, and there's that mother's milk. And that all comes from these sort of Polynesian slaves who are tied to milking machines, if you notice. Did you notice that they were Polynesians, by the way? So quite how they got
Try not to look too hard, to be honest.
yeah, quite how they got these Polynesians from the South Sea Islands over to Australia into the middle of nowhere there, which seems to be the only glimmer of civilization into the entire world. I've no idea, but you know, they managed to do it somehow.
They've got a very good immigration policy, apparently.
And anyone who's ever driven a car and been stuck behind some old lady in a little 1-liter Nissan knows that they can get on bikes and do somersaults with them. I don't know what the old lady biker thing's all about. I've never seen an old lady on a bike, ever. Not somersaulting or ramping off of cliffs. They're just pushing that nonsense into us.
Now, I'll stop you there. What about Hell's Grannies?
Their thing? Is that like Sons of Anarchy, but the one I haven't seen yet?
No, it's a Monty Python sketch, Hell's Grannies.
Oh no.
I don't know if you've seen it. Anyway.
They could have showed the older women as being kind of tough old birds, but believable. You know, if they had a sort of family or a small, even a withered village, they could have had them standing behind barriers ready to shoot. I'd believe that. I'd believe some tough old bird could knock your head off at a good distance with a rifle behind a screen or something.
Well, yeah, certainly the female frontiersmen in the Wild West, they were pretty handy with shotguns.
So they could have easily done a very impressive, strong-willed person that's still believable, but instead they went for this ridiculous stuff.
Yeah, that's
Grannies
right.
on bikes.
Yeah. Although, interestingly, they never managed to build a successful society, did they?
It's funny. Maybe they can't escape the truth even in their own fiction.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
One little thing, going back to the mother's milk thing, did you notice the sort of, when Max bathes in the mother's milk as a sort of form of baptism there? And a sort of baptism into the SJW religion. I don't know if you noticed that. I thought it was a bit of symbolism there.
I never noticed that.
No.
But anyway, that's just a little sort of. There are bits of symbolism that you can pick up on throughout the film, I think. But I think we ought to go back to when Mad Max was proper
Good.
Mad Max. Yeah. Shall we sort of go back to the beginning?
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was
let's
only
go back
mildly
number one.
perturbed, Max.
Well, here's the thing. That's before we get on to that. Depending on where you are in the world, Mad Max might mean something different to you. Like up in Aberdeen, like Mad Max would be somebody who's completely off their rocker, like Doolally. But he's not that in the movie, is he? He's always the most sensible one. There's nothing out there that's mad about him, or is he mad angry?
That's right. There's a sort of a double entendre, isn't there? It's play on the word Max and its double meaning. Yeah, I've often thought about this. How much is he angry and how much is he crazy?
Yeah. And what drove him to that?
Yeah, 'cause he mentions it in the very first film, doesn't he? Where he's talking about, you know, about losing it basically, because he wants to quit, of course, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's when
And
his
keep trying to
family's
bribe
murdered.
him.
Yeah. When his family's murdered, he becomes this shell of a man. Or he is mad. Is he mad angry, or is he mad? Is he being driven mad? Is his madness what drives him? It's a great name for a film.
It is very, very much. It asks questions about existentialist questions and so on, and about what drives someone mad in various different ways. What's a person's breaking point, and how will they react to that breaking point?
What's good as well with the first one is I like how it shows an entire world and the lives of the people very quickly without going too dragging on, with too much baggage like a lot of horror films do at the start. And you can understand this whole world with just the glances you get of this, that, and the other, the people in the street, the houses and the homes, and the small elements of politics in the police station, the way they're trying to bribe them. And then you can now sympathise and understand everything. And I think that's a consequence of what you were mentioning about the budgets. I think because he didn't have an unlimited budget, he had to tell it very efficiently and quickly, and everything that just mattered was what was on the screen, rather than extras that actually detract rather than add.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The first one was made on 400,000 Australian dollars, which is peanut. And one of the interesting things is that at the very beginning you had that shot of the road sign, and it says Highway 9, Sector 26, high fatality road deaths this year 57, monitored by Main Force Patrol. And on the force, the word force, they've crossed out the A. They've crossed out the O and put an A above it. So Main Force Patrol, and that simple shot of that sign tells you all you need to know about this world, more or less. Because what you've got is a sort of area that's been basically sectioned into police areas, so supervised by separate different police areas, which means it's become more or less a police state to keep law and order. So you know that crime is rife and that society is getting out of control. You've got the amount of road deaths, so 57, which is pretty high for this this section, obviously. And so you think, well, why are there so many fatalities? And then you sort of connect it with the idea of crime and so on, and the word force being changed to farce, you realise that the police are losing control of the situation. So you've got all that just in this little shot of a sign.
Yeah, somebody would be arrested for that these days if they'd done that kind of road sign.
And it's done without the CGI or really boring exposition dumps that you sometimes get either from a character or a voiceover. it really is impressive and something to look at for anybody else sort of want to scrutinise for ideas.
Yeah, especially if you're limited for funds and everything. I mean, that film, that very first Mad Max film, I reckon you could make something like that, perhaps not as good and everything. Well, given the democratization of technology these days, how much would that film cost if you used old cars and old motorbikes and everything? I reckon you could make it for under 50 grand.
I mean, even you think of the cameras now, you can get super high definition cameras that are better than anything they had for a fraction of the price, even not taking inflation into account. And you wouldn't have had all the fancy editing software that you can now get free or very cheaply.
You got to remember, he didn't also have the internet back then. It must have been a really tough job getting all those cars and all those mechanics and actors together. But think of the opportunity you have now if you had that same amount of money. And you could do this. I mean, you could make a really good film.
And you could scout locations on an image search and Google Street View. I mean, rather than having to tour around, and you can at least have a look around Wikipedia for locations and Google and so on, and then say, "Oh, let's." And you're really sure if an area is good or not, then you could visit it maybe. But you wouldn't have to spend a fortune touring about or sending out agents.
Yeah,
that's right. I mean, the location is interesting because they wanted to set it in a cityscape originally, but they realized that would cost too much money, and so they set it out in the suburbs where it wouldn't, sort of out in the, well, really outside the suburbs even, and in old buildings. But the old abandoned buildings gave it this idea of societal collapse at the same time.
See, it would have been an awful film if it was set in the city. It wouldn't have had the same effect.
No.
Yeah, it ended up like Escape from LA or something, wouldn't it?
Oh God.
No.
Never mention that film again.
I think we've got to come to Escape from New York and Escape to LA at some point, actually, in one of the podcasts. Because it's amazing how one great film can become a complete disaster in a sequel. But anyway.
And I blame the CGI and budget for it. I think it was just money that was handed away, and I think that's what's happened with Mad Max as well. It's a sort of lesson that sometimes the restrictions you face are actually a blessing, even if they don't feel like it.
Yeah.
For creative things, anyway.
Yeah.
And I'll put myself out on a limb here and say I think that the Blair Witch Project is one of the best movies of all time. Precisely because of that, because you didn't see anything. There's nothing in that movie that's fantastical. It's just the story itself. It didn't cost them anything to make. Whereas Friday the 13th, Part 25, multi-million-dollar budget. Yeah, it's just terrible, though, isn't it?
That's when you've. I mean, that was what was good about Mad Max. In any good story world, is when you've got the feeling, even if it doesn't exist, but the feeling that there's a lot more story and world there than you've been taught. When they just explain everything to you every step of the way, it's terrible. It never works. You're much better leaving it bigger to the imagination than what you see or read.
Yeah, and there was no real ideas in any of the movies that stated exactly what's happened throughout these movies. It's kind of subjective. In Mad Max 1, society is just tinkering on collapsing. There's something happened, but you don't know exactly what. The second movie, you're told about the wars and the oil wars, which is something that was popular back in the news and back in those days. I'm sure there was like an oil crisis back then.
Yeah,
people were going crazy.
There was just before the making of the first Mad Max film. It's one of the inspirations for the film, actually.
So you have this, which people could resonate with, because, oh my God, was World War III coming? Like, it's kind of the same feeling people have now towards the Middle East. So people can resonate slightly with it. In the third movie as well, you know that society has gone really far and it's years ahead and things are just at a complete collapse, but things are starting to be built up again. You didn't need to know any more than that. That was your world.
Yeah.
And the characters never really went outside it.
One of the things that I didn't like about the Mad Max 2 and 3 really was the voiceovers at the beginning. Especially in the second one, I think it was completely superfluous. It was unnecessary.
Yeah, there is that. That's Americans love that shit though. There's so many movies. Legend had the same thing. They made a new
Dark
version of
Cities
Legend.
as well.
Yet they had a narration that explains everything right from the get-go.
Yeah, see, as we're British, of course, and we have a completely different mentality where we think, that's insulting to the audience's intelligence.
Yeah, and it's not a slant against Americans. It's just the way it is. American cut versions of movies always have a narration at the start explaining everything.
Hmm.
Did you know that The Thing accidentally did that for some audiences?
Really? Oh, no.
When they released it in Norway, the Norwegians that came up to the base speaking actually tell you the entire plot in Norwegian. So when they dubbed it, they left their voices, so everybody knew what was going on right away.
Oh, wow.
They go, "Don't go near the dog, it's an alien," and that was it. Nobody ever thought to maybe just change that for the native speaking audience.
Yeah, make them
wow.
Russians or something like that, and then dub it into Russian so they couldn't understand it. Yeah, it would have been a lot better. Yeah, it's there are some things that I think are quite inadequate, especially when you get onto the third film. I think that the third film is really the one where things go downhill fast.
Starts getting more fantastical as well.
Yeah.
Hard to believe.
Well, I think for a start, the whole nuclear war aspect is a cop-out. I don't think you needed that.
Yeah, the economic collapse or oil war thing, that was enough.
Yeah.
It could have just been social collapse even.
Yeah.
Because the first one, it actually was implied it could have just been law and order breaking down. Just a decline of the society rather than something really hammering down in it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And the second one, of course, then you see the complete fall. But it's a natural progression in my view, because you have the motorbiker gangs pretty much taking control and preying more on the people who were the civilization builders and so on. So that's a sort of a natural progression in a way, and you get this. It's pretty similar. 1 and 2 are quite similar in some ways, because you have that idea of the gang who are petrol heads assaulting the civilization builders and the people who are trying to keep law and order and so on, and actually keep society together. So the toe cutter and the humongous, they're similar in some ways, and equally they have that. I've noticed a very strange thing in that there's a sort of an odd, sadistic, homosexual undertones to them.
Yeah, and
especially the guys in
both
thongs.
gangs.
All the guys in thongs and bondage, masks, gimp suits, pink furry cars, and they're always encircling this compound of 95, 99%, 100% white people.
Yeah, who are families and couples.
And what I want to know is, how did the humongous get that ripped, and how does he manage to stay that big and muscly when there's no food, there's no protein shakes? It's rife full of sort of homosexual undertone in it. A big muscly guy in a mask, and he's got his general chained up like a dog,
and a bare arse as well.
Yeah,
that's right. The second in command there. Yeah, he's wearing those sort of queer leather trousers, isn't he, with the arse cut out and a little tail covering his arse.
Yeah.
Bennett from Commando.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's the same. That's right. It's the same guy who plays.
It looks like he let a little too much steam off this time.
I remember he was really angry because his little boyfriend got his head sliced in half by the little feral kid with the, what are those things called again? Boomerangs. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really weird, because you've got a sort of a chain of command who are also in chains, and whoever's holding the chain is in command of the person. But there's also this sort of sexual undertones to it as well, in that they're sort of obviously the passives to the whoever's above them. It's very, very dubious. Although I sort of made an alt-right connection to this, because isn't that what Jack Donovan's says is a perfect society? Sort of, biker gangs, and this sort of chain of hierarchy based on sexual domination and so on.
Oh, wow.
In
a viable society mapped out.
Yeah, that's right. This is very weird. I also noticed that second in command, Wes, as he's called, is sort of lover that gets killed with the boomerang that you've mentioned. He looks a bit like Rob Halford, doesn't he? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, Judas Priest, yeah.
Yeah, as Rob Halford used to be at that time. Do you think there was a little hint there?
Oh, I think so. What, Rob Halford's gay?
It's funny actually, because when I used to listen to heavy metal, I used to be into that crowd at school and everything, and it was there in front of our eyes, and we never realised, in our sort of naivety, but looking back on it, he was hiding in plain sight, wasn't he?
Oh, I never.
I mean,
no, I didn't. I didn't know. I didn't know.
If you just look at the Living After Midnight video, it's, oh dear, and you just think,
there was a time that Liberace could deny it.
Yeah, but there's all sorts of there are lots of perverse stuff during.
Even in the first one, I mean, the second just turned everything up to 11: action, the budget, the theme, but even the homosexuality went ramped up. But you could see the seed of it in the first one.
Absolutely.
With the bizarre sidekick with the eyeliner and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. And the couple that get attacked and then obviously raped, but the man obviously gets raped as well, because he's sort of seen running away in the fields with his trousers off. And it looks like his arse is, there's blood on his arse.
Yeah.
Because you'd assume if they were just after there were a band of pirates just going to kill them for the money and rape the woman, they wouldn't touch him that way. But why is he still alive with this red arse?
Although, one thing that's interesting, if we sort of look at it in terms of today's hegemony and cultural hegemony and everything, all the bad guys are sort of homosexuals in a way, and the good guys are normal family types, and this goes against the narrative in a way, doesn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, it's very clear in that one. The first one, all the good characters, even the was it the auntie or the gran with the shotgun? You see again all these like the normal families trying to hold things together. And in the second one, this last bastion, dressed in white, to really emphasise it. And I suppose the third one it deviated from that, into this bizarre town of God knows what. Where even the mechanic wears this bizarre fetish gear for no reason at all. It's the most impractical equipment I could imagine to work in. Just daily work, wearing these bizarre body straps that even He-Man would have been ashamed to be seen in.
Yep.
It's very odd. One of the interesting things as well with the costumery and so on, especially in the second film, is in contrast to the bad guys all wearing sort of bondage gear and black leather and so on, the good guys, they all sort of wear very light colours and everything. And I noticed that there's a lot of there's a lot of cricket whites involved there. Of course, it's in Australia, so it's a very popular sport and everything. But cricket whites, as we know, well, probably more me because it's not very popular up in Scotland. But as an Englishman, cricket whites indicate, this idea of gentlemanly play and so on. That cricket is a civilized game, and it's this idea of civilization versus barbarity, which I think is one of the major themes of all the Mad Max films, really.
Yeah. Up in Scotland, I just think of it as rounders for posh people.
It's nothing like rounders. Rounders is baseball.
Oh.
Thinking about that, the camp there in the second one, there was also the scene where you get the sort of traitors within, wanting to betray them to Humongous, showing that the weakness of civilization versus the barbarity that's just going to steamroll it if that weakness is allowed to flourish or be listened to.
It's like the I Am Legend thing where the guys constantly every night, the women are beckoning him to come out. Come outside, Neville. Come outside. Everyone's going to be okay. Just open your doors and come out. It's that sort of temptation, and people fall for it. Because the guy says, "I'm going to speak to this Humongous. He sounds like a reasonable man." Like, what part
Humongous of reasonable?
What part of sounds reasonable to you?
Yeah. It's funny actually because he's a very articulate guy, isn't he? And I suppose we associate people who are articulate with being reasonable, even if they're not.
Yeah.
And this is sort of playing out with the left at the moment, in that there are a lot of articulate leftists, but they're not particularly reasonable.
Yeah. It's Humongous. The thing I've always liked about him is that he's got this. There's something about the way he speaks. You could be tempted into thinking he would be okay with you, but like I said, what part of racing around your compound day after day would seem reasonable? And most people would say, "Hey, there's something about this guy. He's got a mask on. He's big and muscly, and he's got his body chained up like a dog. I'm going to speak to him and try and work things out."
Yeah, very much so. It's funny because in a way he does have certain heroic characteristics and so on. He is a leader type because both sides have leader types, but in a way he's sort of feeding off civilization, is the Humongous, whereas the others are trying to construct civilization. And it's interesting that Max has that charge leveled at him as well by the leader of the compound, that Papagallo, and he says to him, "You're a maggot living off the corpse of the old world, and also we're still human beings with dignity, but you're garbage, you're nothing." And you have this sort of tension all the time between civilization and barbarity, and that you could easily go from one to the other given the circumstances.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about the Humongous character is he must have had a certain amount of reason to him if he's able to get all those guys to follow him. Like, what did he have to do to get up there in the hierarchical chain to be the top dog in that gang?
Steroids.
The same thing I had. Yeah, steroids on protein shakes and gains.
You get a hint, obviously deliberate, of some sort of horrible past from when you see the back of his head all scarred and pulsating and weird. And and looking it up, you do find out that that's a rubber mask they put on the back of his head, deliberate for that shot. And the maids look all veiny and rotten. So there's obviously this hint that he's been through something horrible that scarred him physically and mentally.
Yeah, so that's right. Whereas Mad Max, Max Rokotansky is scarred mentally, but not physically. But yet he could go one way or the other. You have this impression because he's very mercenary in this film, isn't he?
Mm.
Yeah, he is.
Although
Well, forcefully.
you get a good contrast with Max in this way that he's maybe balanced, say, 60-40 towards good and bad, let's say, while you get the Bruce Spence, the gyro captain, he's maybe more in the 50-50. He could have gone in either way on it.
Yeah, that's very true. And in fact, Bruce Spence is a great actor. Of course, is he Mr. Wall in in Dark City?
That's
If
right.
I
Yeah.
remember rightly, yeah.
Yeah, so he was in that. Yeah.
Yeah. But Bruce Spence is a fantastic actor, and I think that he plays that part of the gyro captain extremely well, because there's that scene where he sort of watches the rape scene, and he's in two minds about watching it for sexual gratification, and equally being appalled by it. And so he's in that stage where he's in conflict between being decent and being civilized and being sort of barbaric and degenerate and so on. I think that's a really well played scene, to be honest.
Yeah.
And he does so much at just look and emotion coming through that the facial features. There was no many actors could pull that off.
Yeah, that's right. The other great scene with him as well is the dog food scene, where sort of Max sort of eats this tin of dog food, gives the remains to his dog, and then the gyro captain picks that up and tries to get some remains out from what the dog's left. And of course, this is sort of really the lowest of the low, but to try to regain his civility, he starts, he dabs at his mouth with a napkin. Did you notice that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I thought that was, that was really brilliantly done as well. And it's those little sort of details, those little scenes that really make it stand above your average action fare, I think.
He's a great character as well, and to be honest with you, I think most guys who watch the movie would like to think that they could be Mad Max, but most of us are probably more like the gyro captain. He was the normal guy. He was this sort of everyday average guy who was out on his own. So he survived too, and he was a survivor. And you must think, well, he can't be just this old skinny geek who lives in the desert and flies around in a helicopter. This guy must have some skills on him too. He must have survived through all this. And what did he do? He's a great character, and he's played really well by the guy, because he still wants to retain this bit of dignity from his old life, despite what he's having to do. Eat out of a dog can that's been eaten by two other people, or a person and his dog.
And all you see the division in him, the way he kind of sways one way or the other, while still trying to hold on to his humanity. It also sort of implies that even somebody that's in that middle ground can be pushed the right direction, be it by the kind of paternal Max figure or the compound leader. The two of them have different ways, but you can see they both at least push him more towards, the good side of things, the civilized way, rather than becoming sort of degenerate and barbaric.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very much so. It's interesting going on to Mad Max 3 that when you have a rebuilding of society, it becomes a degenerate society. So the civilization that they build is actually pretty degenerate. And
it feels like the civilization Humongous or Toe Cutter would have built.
Yeah, that's right. Instead of the one that Papagallo would have built. I think that's very interesting that it sort of went towards that. I suppose, really, because if they build a society like of the ones that Papagallo wanted to build, there would be no vehicle for an action film. See, you always need that sort of evil, that corruption or whatever, to fight against. Because
it would have just ended up the second one again, the good under a fort.
Yeah, So it's interesting in a way that if you get the perfect society, it denies heroism.
Although the third one did have an almost perfect society, it just wasn't a technological one.
Yeah, it was a black woman running the show while white people walked around in pig shit, heating up her electricity, and she has a obligatory saxophonist. It's the kind of thing a sort of black person in power probably would do.
And the bizarre Wheel of Fortune and Thunderdome and stuff burning up resources.
Yeah, and having disabled people fighting it out in cages. I mean, it sounds like modern day some places in America, to be honest with you.
But at the same time, you've got the kids living in their own little slice of paradise. They might not have electricity, but that's the place I would want to live, is in a place where you've got plenty of food, nice weather, clean water. You know, you could build something there that would last rather than the obviously fragile biker gang Thunderdome place.
Yeah,
we all know that Max went back to that little oasis in the desert and lived a happy life on his own.
It's interesting, of course, because those two societies are almost the Christian views of heaven and hell, aren't they? That's what they're getting at there. I think that the one is obviously paradise and the other is obviously hell. I think that's where they're going with it, and so that the two are contrasted. I don't know if you got that impression.
Oh, and the journey they had to make to get there as well, was it worth it?
To the city, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, was it worth going all the way there? Or did they regret it as soon as they got there? Bugger, I wish they never left that place.
Yeah, I mean, they had the chance to build fresh in this, small bit of paradise, and instead they chose to travel all the way to the just ruined, and you'd assume radioactive remains, where they're just living in this burnt out skyscraper on one of the floors, making fires on the floor. And you think, well, that whole place is obviously going to collapse at some point. I don't know what resources they could even manage to scavenge. The best thing they could do is keep well away from that, in that situation. There's nothing for them.
Yeah, it made no sense, that really. Although I suppose in a way, aren't people attracted to cities?
Even when they're unhealthy. Yeah.
So, just as they left that, this paradise, it's interesting, I think, that the female leader, because you've got a male leader and a female leader there in this paradise place, and her name's Savannah, which pretty much gives the game away, that it is sort of meant to be a paradise. But she sort of leaves it for the city, to Bartertown. It's interesting that it's called Bartertown as well, because it sort of reflects this idea of the capitalist society based on trade, and that the civilization that's built upon liberal capitalist ideas inevitably leads to moral turpitude and corruption and so on.
I did wonder by the end of the film, when you watch the train and them travelling to that city, it didn't look like even half of them had gone, because in the earlier scenes, there's huge numbers of them, but yet later on it looks like there's only about half a dozen that go to the city, and you kind of wonder if the ones that stayed in paradise probably had the better side of the deal.
Yeah. I mean, there are a few things that gives the game away on this sort of decadent society of Bartertown. The other is, I mean, you've mentioned this sort of arena, the Thunderdome. I think that's a pretty much direct reference to the Colosseum of Rome. It's sort of a postmodern version of that.
Was it maybe a way to keep people under control so they'd be able to go along and watch some people kill each other and duke it out and release some inner rage by shouting and screaming and getting involved with the sport, kind of like football now. Yeah. Maybe something to go along to burn off some steam, hurl some abuse at the players, and just feel good about yourself and go back home, just to keep the crowds happy.
That's right. Bread and circuses, as they said in Rome.
Yeah.
Keep the masses happy.
And it's a really cool film. Like, so there's some really good aspects to it. I wasn't sure though. Maybe you guys can explain it to me. When Max wins and he's got to spin the wheel, or he broke the deal, so he's got to spin the wheel, something like that. It stops in the word gulag, but he's like tied up to a donkey and like has like a bag put over his head and sent off into the desert. Is that
giant mask they stuck on him? It didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, am I missing something here?
I can't think of what meaning of the word applies to riding off on a donkey. Never mind the fact that I'd imagine a donkey in that situation is incredibly valuable, and yet they just send Max out to with the donkey to die. They'd probably kill him and keep the donkey.
Yeah, it's never made sense to me. I was hoping one of you guys could explain it.
I'm stumped.
No.
I'm stumped. I really can't. That whole part didn't make much sense at all, which I suppose is back to us thinking less of this film in general, even though there are fun parts.
Yeah, I think the main problem with this film is that it doesn't know what it wants to be, because it seems to want to be more for kids, older kids, but still kids. It's got that sort of Goonies aspect to it. The Goonies, of course, came a bit later, and I think took a lot of inspiration from this film in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you could imagine somebody letting their kid watch the Mad Max 3, but you'd never let them watch the first one with the horrendous rapes, and violence that have implied everywhere.
Well, this is the problem with it, because how do you go from having Max as a character in that sort of film, which is really sort of gritty realism, and where there's sexual violence and things like that in it, to making him sort of this wholesome family figure, for some kind of family film. It doesn't make much sense to me.
Is there some kind of Peter Pan aspect to it? I know that might sound ridiculous, but the sort of children living in the paradise, the captain, was he called Captain Rogers or something like
Walker.
that? They think he's Captain Walker. Is that some kind of Peter Pan reference? Because in the second movie you have a reference to Odin. One of his eyes gets damaged and sealed shut, and he's got like effectively one eye for the rest of the movie. Is there some kind of maybe fairy tale aspect to this, or nod to mythology like the other movies?
I think you're right with the nod to Peter Pan, very much so. If you watch the film Hook as well, weren't both Hook and The Goonies directed by Spielberg?
I believe you're right, yeah.
And they and they both seem to have aspects of this film. They seem to be very much inspired by this film, both of them, in the set design and everything. So I think you're quite right to pick up on that, to be honest.
Well, I just thought it was very similar, but yeah, possibly.
It would make sense if they were aiming at this as some sort of children's film to take inspiration from a famous sort of children's setting and story.
Yeah. Yeah. The children also, they have sort of their own dialect and everything, don't they? That's developed, which I think would be quite natural, actually. You sort of get that in things like Cloud Atlas and even Threads. So that these things develop.
The way they changed the Gyro Captain, I mean, it was meant to be a different character, but we've got Bruce Spence again playing essentially the same character. But even he's doing another good performance, but you can see the way he was used and the way the script was written fall short. It's not him falling short. You can see that you don't get the same emotional scenes or the same chance for him to shine in this one. He's more of a sort of comic, sort of stereotype character, loud and action and funny and just sort of zooming about. While the first one, he was tragic and emotional and a real person sort of suffering, even if he did something funny.
you would think, why not just make him the same character and make it? It just so happens Mad Max meets him again. Just that would be more believable than taking the same actor but getting him to do a completely different role.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially as they could use the excuse that there's very few places of life left. You know, it's a small world again.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the fact that he becomes a comedy figure is generally in tone with the film, because you have a lot of slapstick violence in it, you know, to be contrasted with the gritty realism of the first two films, and as I say, the nastier kind of violence, if you like. There's even one with a frying pan.
I was going to mention that guy.
Oh yeah.
And he keeps popping up like the Roadrunner or something. He keeps getting knocked down and he appears. And there's even a bit where he screams and it fast forwards into him like a cartoon.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, it seems very out of character, does this film, given the other two, and yeah, I can't get on with it very much, really. I'll be honest.
But then you can see that the first two work well together. Then you've got the third one where they've sort of turned it into this kind of comedy kids film, in the wrong direction. And then with the fourth one, they went the opposite way and done this try hard gritty thing, which, you know, it ends up looking and feeling like a video game. And that's the whole of the fourth one is just this video game. The third one, as you say, it's like the Goonies or something.
Yeah, very very much so. Also, what's interesting is the music changes as well, because in the first two films it was Brian May, not to be confused with the Brian May from Queen, different Brian May. But Brian May, he did a lot of film scores and things like that, and they changed it to Maurice Jarre, who's the father of Jean-Michel Jarre. And that's interesting as well, because you have a different tone in the music. So everything sort of changes in tone.
Do you know what it felt like? Mad Max Part 3, it felt like a giant commercial for Pepsi, Coke, or something like that. You've got the Tina Turner song right at the very end just to sell it, to sell the soundtrack. It just looked like a big Pepsi advert.
I know what you mean. Yeah, it reminds me of the old music videos and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the same sort of techniques and lighting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Now, speaking of characters coming back, or actors coming back as different characters, of course, in the first film you've got Toe Cutter, and in the last one, Mad Maxine or whatever it is, Fury Road, you have Immortan Joe, played by the same guy, Hugh Keys-Byrne. I don't know what you make of that.
It's something they added for the fanboys, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a cynical move. A lot of these elements are just cynical moves to generate hype and get people in, get positive comments on, you know, forums and stuff. Pure cynicism.
I don't like the way he was killed. I thought it was a bit disrespectful to the actor and to his character. I mean, if they're going to bring the guy back for a movie, at least give him a cool death. I thought it was a bit of a crap way to kill him off, with the chain around in the throat and have his lower half of his head ripped off.
Yeah. Although it's sort of, I think that what they wanted to try to do with this belated sequel was to undo the third film, if you like, and get it back to the sort of harder edge of the first two films.
Yeah, it's possible, but they didn't do a really good job of it.
No, they've gone too far into yet another direction of a parody of it instead.
Yeah.
It just seemed like I said, the other three movies chopped up and thrown into like a big mixing pot and just jazzed up with some cool CGI. It put Tom Hardy in it and put Charlize Theron in it. It's crap, basically.
It's exactly what you'd get if you had somebody trying to imitate another artist or famous works and make something like it. Like if you got a decent painter, can you make something like, you know, the famous painting of your choice? And then you'd never get something exactly like that true genius of the original.
Yeah.
And that's what you're seeing here. You know, you're seeing them trying to inflate sort of famous things from the previous in the originals and mash it all together into this, as you said, Neil, this bizarre patchwork.
And there's a scene, I'm not sure what you guys think about this. Maybe I'm just being paranoid when I'm watching this movie. I watched it again recently. There's a scene about maybe 2/3 into it. Sorry, three quarters, I don't know. Where there is a character that looks a lot like the original Mad Max, Mel Gibson, and he has his eyes shot out. And there's a brief sort of scene with him in a leather jacket, and I'm thinking to myself, that looks like Mel Gibson. That looks like what he looked like in the second movie. But his eyes have been ripped out. He gets like shot through the binoculars, and the glass pierces his eyes or something like that. Do you think that was a stab at Mel Gibson?
It could well be.
Could be, yeah.
I mean, it's hard to imagine anything appearing in that by accident. You know, somebody will probably notice out the hundreds of crew, oh, that looks a bit like Mel Gibson. Or he must have specified a certain look for who he's looking for. He's not just going to take some random guy off the street and let him wander in and do a random stunt. I think that must have been deliberate.
Or it could just be a coincidence. But like I said, when I see coincidences in movies, leather jacket, the kind of swept back hair, I just thought that guy looks a lot like what Mel Gibson looked like when he was going through that troubling time in the late 2000s.
But I mean, if this was like a RoboCop film or something, you say, oh, well, it's not meant to look like him. But this is, of course, the Mad Max film that he was essentially shoved out of. It's hard to imagine that being a coincidence.
But you can look it up, just go into Google and have a look at type Mel Gibson Mad Max 4, and you'll see some kind of screen grab. But I just thought it was a little bit too coincidental, and I thought maybe this is a little of a backhand by George Miller.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past him, to be honest. Speaking of parodies as well, I think that in a way even the first film is a bit of a parody of a film that it owes a lot of inspiration from, which is the film Stone, which is a biker film, or in Australian slang, bikey. And a lot of the people who feature in that film, so again, Hugh Keys-Byrne, who plays the toe cutter, Roger Ward, who plays Mad Max's boss, Fifi, isn't he, he's called, and Vincent Gill, who plays the Knight Rider. They're all in that film, but you have more of a rounded view of the bikers and so on in that film. And whereas in Mad Max they're pretty much cardboard cutouts, sort of stereotypical villains.
And you also had movies like Easy Rider, which came out the late 60s. And that kind of portrayed bikers as being hippies and people who are looking for freedom and the good guys. But in Mad Max, they're these kind of evil punks who like raping and killing people.
In Stone, they sort of they're not necessarily good people, but they have a certain ethics. Although it's not necessarily the ethics of society, if you see what I mean. They wouldn't be regarded as good people, but they have but they're not necessarily terribly evil. So that's that I noticed was you can see the inspiration from that film, because it only came out about 3 years before Mad Max. 3, 4, 5 years before Mad Max, something like that. So, and this was, I wouldn't say a big Australian film, but everyone would have known it, because you don't get that many films in Australia at this time. And as his cast was basically in that film, he's got to have known that film as George Miller.
Does he talk much about it or sort of promote it at all? George Miller, I mean, talk about that film as an inspiration or positive thing?
I've never seen him talk about it in an interview, I'll be honest. But as I say, you know, he's a lot of his cast was in it, so he's bound to have seen it.
You'd think he would, especially as he's became a big name. Sort of give the other guy a leg up if he thinks these people have done good work and inspired him. Obviously, it helped make his career too.
Well, that's very interesting actually, because the guy who directed Stone, I can't remember who he's called now, but he never made another film because no one got behind him. And so
because he was portraying bikers in such a good light, or not such a good light, but
Sandy Harbut.
Yeah, Sandy Harbut. That's him. Yeah, that's right. And he wrote the thing as well. And you know, some people tried to get behind him but didn't have the money and so on. But George Miller certainly didn't do anything for him.
So that's quite telling when somebody's essentially coming in as the second mouse getting the cheese, and you don't even think to maybe thank the person that's helped make you, you know, a multi-millionaire and household name nearly.
Well, look what he did to Mel Gibson.
Yeah. So I think that George Miller is a very dubious character in general, to be honest.
Made some of the most fantastic films ever made, but he's a shitbag at the end of the day.
That's right. You know, he made great films like Happy Feet.
Happy Feet 2 is fantastic as well.
That might be.
It must be.
Go on.
I was going to say, it must be weird, you know, going from Mad Max to Happy Feet. You know, what must that be like? Do you really get up in the morning saying, "Oh, I can't wait to make Happy Feet," you know, or Happy Feet 2 or whatever, after you've expressed yourself and sort of got into things through something like Mad Max?
Yeah.
I think these things are punishments. I think somebody upstairs is saying, listen, if you want to make another movie again with Mad Max in it, you're going to have to make 2 movies with penguins.
Well, but apparently this was George Miller's own decision, because he had children at the time, and this is probably also why he's mentioned this in an interview, that this is probably one of the reasons, subconsciously, why Mad Max 3 became more of a children's film, because he had children at the time, and then of course he went on to do things like Happy Feet and so on. He started making children's film. Babe, of course, he made. Which is actually, I think that Babe's a good film.
It is.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the reason. Now, have we got anything to add in closing? Because I think we should sort of wrap up now, because we've been going for some time.
I think we've hit most of it.
We have indeed, yeah.
Absolutely.
Apart from maybe telling people to totally ignore the 4th film, and if they're desperate for more Mad Max, apparently the video game of it's actually much better.
Yeah, the video game's fantastic, and it's got a better storyline. It's just better everything. I'm not saying don't watch the new one. I mean, watch it, then realize why you shouldn't have watched it in the first place.
That's brilliant. So the video game is the real Mad Max 4 then? That's what we're saying?
Yes.
Excellent. That's a great note to leave it on then. So I'm David Yorkshire, and thanks to Neil and to James.
Thank you.
As usual. And we will be back with another session hopefully very shortly. So we hope to see you then. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye.